Hey, friends. Welcome to Boldly You, the podcast for inspiring stories which consist of daring choices and transformative journeys. From entrepreneurs to everyday heroes, we are exploring the messy and motivating sides of making big changes. Whether it's a career leap or something deep, Boldly You is your go-to for living life unapologetically bold. Now, let's get right into it. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Boldly You podcast. I am your host, Destiny Mackey, and today we have a wonderful guest. Her name is Raman Hari, and she is an intuitive life coach. Welcome to the podcast, Raman.
Thank you, Destiny. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. It's so great to get to meet you today, and we get to talk about all sorts of things. But, just tell me a little bit about yourself. We'll get started from there.
Yeah, for sure. So, my intuitive coaching journey actually started when I sought out some help for myself. And I haven't talked about it too much on, out there in the world, but my story actually started when I was having my own anxiety and panic attacks. And at the time I was dating someone who told me about this coach who was a coach that went from a family physician to an intuitive coach. And he was like, my whole family sees her. She's great. You should maybe see her. And I felt really drawn to her. So I ended up seeing her. And it was the first time in my life that I actually sat down with myself
Mm,
and saw what was going on deeper, within. And I've always been a very spiritual person. And for a while, I was sort of spiritual bypassing, right? Which is when you kind of use spiritual foundations and the comfort you get from being connected spiritually to kind of avoid the things that are hard in life. You're like, oh, I'm just going to, feel really spiritually connected. And then I won't have to worry about all the other like panic attack stuff, right? But anyway, so I start seeing this woman and she really helped me get to the root of what was going on with the panic attacks. And it was a lot of, childhood stuff, upbringing, and really I was sort of replaying certain wounds that happened earlier on in life. Yeah, so
okay.
that was my story into getting into intuitive coaching. It started with the panic attacks and the healing of that.
Got it. And, panic attacks, they are much different from anxiety attacks. Panic attacks actually make you feel like you are dying, even
Dying.
though you're not dying. Some people think they're having heart attacks and they're not. It's just a panic attack. And a lot of the times, panic attacks come from things that we don't even know. They just happen very randomly. Whereas anxiety attacks, usually there is a trigger or something that has happened that causes you to feel that way. And anxiety can definitely be severe too, but panic attacks are just a more extreme. So, when you went to go see this coach to help you with these issues, what were some of the things that you identified that were those underlying causes for having those panic attacks?
Yeah. So, firstly, what I learned through that journey was that anytime, and so for me, it was really learning, well, what is this messenger trying to tell me? And and so the beginning of that journey was really feeling into that feeling of not being in control when you're having either a panic attack or anxiety attack. For me, it was like both. I can't quite pinpoint, the times I had panic attacks and the times I had anxiety attacks, but it was kind of both.
Mhm.
And so I was able to, she really helped me get into my body, identify where I felt the anxiety in my body. And
Okay.
then what we did was she she could actually see certain things, like, okay, for example, it's weird because it's intuitive coaching, so it's also like intuitive, and she's feeling guided to say certain things and then I'm feeling things. So one thing that she asked me, which I thought was super strange, was, tell me more about your grandparents. And I was
Hmm.
like, oh, that's strange, I'm not really like close to them. They've always lived in either India or Alberta and I'm here in BC, so they haven't really been a part of my life. And then suddenly I had this light bulb, this thing go off that was like, oh wait, but when I was one, when I was a 1-year-old, my grandparents were in town and they asked my parents were immigrants and they had already had my brother who's 2 years older than me. They asked my parents if they could take me to India and just sort of like take a kid off your back kind of a thing.
Okay.
Like, "Oh, like, why don't we take Raman to India? It'll be great. Like, you'll have one less kid to worry about," kind of a thing. And I think I think deep down my mom didn't want to say yes, but, the things that she grew up with was, listen to your elders and all this kind of stuff. So she was like, "Yeah, okay, yeah, that's a great idea." And so they took me to India and I was 1.
Mm,
Going into that story was so interesting because I had never, like, really sat down and thought about what kind of consequences that has for a kid in the future. But I was in India, and so I was basically for 6 months, I was with them, and then I had an uncle, my dad's brother, who was in town in India in the village, and then he was like, "Oh, why don't I take Raman to the other village?" Right? So now I'm being taken to, like, my dad's village, which is very poor, so it was just a very different lifestyle than my mom's village that she grew up in, and the grandparents were my mom's parents. And when my mom came to get me, I didn't recognize her. So she had to
mm,
kind of lure me in with because I was 1, like, when I first went
right.
there. So, like, a year later, I don't recognize that that's my mom. And then
Wow.
yeah, and, like, my hair was fried because I was outside all day, like, I wasn't really being taken care of the way I should have been as a kid, and I was, like, eating dirt. Like, it was pretty wild. Yeah, so when my mom finally got me back home, she, like, shaved all my hair off so that I could regrow healthy. So, it was
Wow.
one of those weird stories that I didn't really think about. Every now and then I was like, "Oh, I wonder how that affected me," but the first time I really delved into that story was with the intuitive coach, and I could feel what that little kid was feeling for
Mm,
the first time. And of
wow.
course, that little kid is feeling completely powerless,
Mhm,
right? And alone. And so a lot of the anxiety feelings that I would get like with the anxiety attacks and even with the panic attacks, it's like this feeling of like impending doom, nothing is
mm,
good, I am all alone, and I'm completely powerless to this. And it was very similar to what that little girl, kind of experienced when I was 1. So, I know that we're getting so deep, but that's the one, like, really big kind of story that we delved into, and I think there's a really big power in really
mhm.
going into our story, going into the things that we kind of dealt with because that one-year-old still lives within us.
Right.
And that one-year-old was the one who was almost, like, freaking out in certain moments, if that makes sense.
That makes total sense, but it's also shocking to me that you were 1 years old and that affected you so much. I mean, do you actually remember being there at 1 years old? Do you have conscious memories, or are these just things that people were telling you, like, "This is
Yeah,
what happened when you were."
I mean, I definitely don't remember anything from when I was 1. My
Got
earliest
it.
memories are probably, like, 4 or 5 years old, and so but the thing is, even if you don't have the memory,
Mm,
your body has that memory, and
yeah.
so it's not really in our mind, it's sort of in our subconscious, and our subconscious is sort of, like, happening in our body, and so for me, when I would feel all that chest stuff, when I would feel the, like, really intense fear in my belly, it's like it was that one-year-old. And so for me, a lot of the work was working with that one-year-old and letting her know
Wow.
sort of reparenting work, like letting her know that she's safe.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow, that is really, I mean, I can't say I'm surprised, but it is surprising at the same time to be that young and to hold that pain and that scared, traumatic feeling since you were 1, you don't even consciously remember it. And honestly, that scares me because 'cause I'm like, "Oh my god, what have I gone through since I was 1 years old that I'm probably holding on to that I never even dove into?" But, I mean, that's amazing that she was able to recover that piece of information for you. Wow. Honestly, I didn't even know that was a thing either, to have a coach like that with those abilities to be able to do that. I mean, I am very spiritual as well. I've just never heard of somebody doing like a therapy type work with that.
Mhm. Yeah. It's
Wow.
interesting because I mean, that's like what I do now because it was a very odd journey of me, you know, uncovering all this stuff, and then that coach actually offers they actually stopped now, but they offered at the time a year-long training to become an intuitive coach, and I took
Oh,
that
wow.
training because I wanted to learn how to do what she was doing, but, like,
Yeah.
learn more about myself. I didn't know I was gonna end up actually doing the intuitive coaching by the end of it and working with my own clients, but I had a client the reason I got really into sort of working on anxiety this past year, it's not just because of my own story, but I specifically had this client come in who said that she was having a panic attack every day,
Mm,
and that I it just blew my mind. I was like, "Oh my god, there's someone out there who's having a panic attack every day."
mhm.
That is a lot, that's
Yeah.
exhausting, and that was the first time where I was like, "Ooh, I really want to kind of delve deeper into this," and for her, it was a lot of childhood stuff too. It was a lot of childhood stuff. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, you don't realize how much unconsciously you can be affected by those things. I mean, even in my I've been going to therapy for the past 10 years, and there was so much stuff that I never even consciously thought about that could affect me. I was getting triggered all the time, and I had no idea that that was just me being triggered. I just thought I had emotional problems, and I'm like, "Oh, this is my brain. This is just me." But when you actually dive in and get down to the nitty-gritty of where it comes from, it all starts to make sense, and you can actually start being able to control that so you don't have to feel that way anymore.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's like, the awareness is what creates change, and so as soon as we become aware of that, we just start to automatically shift, as long as you're open to change, right? Because some
Right.
people are like, "Oh, I'm aware," but like, "Oh, my mom," you know?
Yeah.
But, throughout that whole experience, it's amazing how much healing happens because I'm pretty open with my parents about what I'm healing through in terms of that kind of stuff, especially when I started coaching, and I went to my mom and I was like, "Hey, did you know that, that whole experience that happened, that like really affected me. It really did." And so it was I was able to start this open dialogue with my mom as well
Mm,
and also let her know that, it's not your fault because I know she held a lot of guilt from that.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can totally understand that. Was she receptive to it at first when you brought it up, or was she kind of, like, feeling defensive,
Yeah,
maybe
she
didn't
was
wanna believe
receptive.
it? She
Yeah. I
was.
mean, she was receptive, but I think she was still a little bit like, "Oh, it was the uncle who took you to your dad's poor village." Like just the classic, like, I'm angry, I'm gonna point it
Projection.
outwards, but I'm also like, I'm really just angry at myself kind of a thing. But it was cool because I think it really helped that I was working with someone who was a family physician by trade
Mhm.
because that credibility allowed my mom to be like, "Oh, wow, like, she's been seeing this doctor person who also has been coaching her, and so clearly that has some weight to it, some significance to it." And so she was able to, like, really receive that, and I think it also helped that she saw that I was actually healing.
Yeah.
'Cause it wasn't just like, "Oh, mom, like, did you know?" It was like, "Hey, mom, did you know?" But also like, "I'm feeling so much better. I've been doing all this forgiveness work, but,
Aw.
like, did you know that, like, this actually really affected me?" So, it's a beautiful thing though to be able to, because it's not just healing me, right? It heals the people around you who, like, went through those things together with you.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely, I think that's wonderful that she was so receptive. I hope you don't mind. I wanted to jump back and ask, when you started doing this intuitive coaching with the coach that no longer does these services anymore, how long did it take for you to actually start seeing improvements in your own life?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, the it was after the discovery call that we had? So, like, 1
Okay.
session kind of a thing? Yeah, I remember specifically, I was a little bit, like, over my job as well, and I didn't know that I wanted to walk away at that point. I deep down did not wanna be there, but I wasn't really sure what the next step was, and so one it's interesting, there's, like, so much to it when it comes to panic attacks as well, but for me, one thing I noticed was my anxiety was sort of showing me where I wasn't aligned in my
Mhm.
life, and I knew I wanted to do something different in terms of work, but after seeing this intuitive coach for our first session, like, before I even started paying her, like, our discovery call, I remember, coming back for our first session and being like, "Oh, yeah, so I quit my job." That's just me, I'm very, like, when I'm ready, I'm ready,
Yeah.
And it wasn't like, "Oh, I thought about it, I made an impulsive choice because I was being emotional and reactive." It was like I had felt this nudge for months and months, like, honestly, years. And yeah, so in a way, as as soon as our first session was over, I started making some pretty big changes.
That's awesome. I mean, were you still having panic attacks for a long period of time, or did they seem like they started to subside immediately?
The the panic, the anxiety started to it was weird because it would sort of heal and then something else would come up and then we would heal that and then it was sort of yeah, it was just unlayering. It was like
Mhm.
layers. And so it's interesting because I did start feeling better, but then things would come up and then I would go down those layers and
Mm.
continue to do the healing work. So it wasn't like one session and I was all healed, but it was one session and I felt so much better and lighter and I had all this awareness and then boom, I'm heavy again because, "Oh shit, now
Mm.
what?" Right? So
Right.
it was just sort of an unlayering process.
Right. Well, even and if you just go to regular talk therapy, that's kind of the same too. You feel like you start to get better and then you hit ruts through it, and that's
Mhm.
just part of the healing process.
Yeah.
And the other thing too is to actually make changes in our brain, we need to continuously make those changes. We have to continuously act them out. And so if there were situations that made you caught that unconsciously caused you to have panic attacks, you probably had to relive that situation, but try to comfort yourself when you were in those moments. And the act of just recomforting and trying to rewire that panic to something that is more healthy, more positive, that
Mhm.
takes time too.
Mhm. Yeah, it's definitely it takes a willingness to grow through that, and I mean, I know for sure that the clients I've worked with that are like, "Oh my god, yeah, like, let's do the work, let's shift." It's amazing, they are just like
Mhm.
leaps and bounds, right? But of course, if you're resistant, if you're like, "Oh, I don't wanna heal this," that's a totally different story. So it is an openness to continuously healing and really it's like showing up for yourself. I think sometimes if you're like, "Oh, it's a lifelong process to keep healing," it seems a little overwhelming, like, "Oh my god, so I'm not gonna ever heal?" But
Right.
it's we're constantly evolving, we're constantly learning, and we're just showing up for ourselves in that moment, and that's where I think intuition and receiving guidance as well is really what helped sort of, like, lift me up, if that makes
Mhm.
sense. Because I think sometimes when you're healing and healing and healing and healing and doing so much of, like, oh, so much inner child work, oh my god, so much reparenting, oh my god, it's like there needs to be a way to sort of come up for air. And
Mhm.
so for me, that's where my spiritual foundation really came in and uplifted me, and I was able to, like, tune into the guidance, like, what is the message in this moment? Rather
Right.
than, "Oh, like, that thing's coming up again and I'm feeling anxious again. Okay, let me reparent myself." It was more so, "Oh, okay, I feel that feeling again. Oh, what is that? Let me feel into that. Let me journal about it. Let me ask what the message is. Like, what's the guidance here?" And that
That's
I feel like
awesome.
is the lifelong process, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Did you have these intuitive feelings prior to meeting this person? Like, was that something that was always there? Do you feel like when you started doing the work, it was more enhanced?
Ooh, that's a great question. So I think it was definitely enhanced when I started doing the work. And I believe we're all intuitive and
Mm.
we have all experienced intuitive nudges. I think we can all feel energy, right?
Mhm.
If you walk into a party, you just know the energy. It's like, is this a place I want to be? Am I feeling called here? Or even a restaurant. I'm thinking of like walking into certain restaurants and I'm like, "Ah, I love it here." Like it's just there's an energy to it.
Like,
And so I think we all can feel energy. We're all very intuitive in that way. But the cool thing about doing the work and sort of what I see is it's almost like there's all this density in our body, which sounds really intense, but it's almost like there's this yeah, there's all this darkness. There's all this density and these stories that we have. And once we're able to like really look at them and shine light on them, it creates more space, and when we have more space in our body, we are able to very easily and naturally hear the intuition that's already there. So
mhm.
we're not like our inner world's not muddled with all of this other stuff, with all of these other anxieties. And obviously, if you're like having an anxiety moment, it's harder to hear your intuition. So once you start healing
Absolutely.
that, it kind of clicks and it turns on a little bit more. And then also, very specifically, when I was working with this coach, she was an intuitive coach and she also helped people like tune into their own intuition. Like, so what do you feel guided to do? And these were all words that I had never really heard before I had coaching with her. I feel like it's a little bit more out there nowadays.
Mhm.
You'll hear about this stuff, but when I was getting coaching with her, I was like, "Oh, okay, let me just tune in, I guess." And she got me to start tuning in. Okay, when you're waking up in the morning and you're deciding on having a glass of water or starting with like a green juice, like just feel into it. Like what do I feel called to do?
Mhm.
Um and so in these little ways I started strengthening my intuition. And that was really fun. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so important to listen to your intuition. I know for me, there was so many instances in my life where I did listen to it and it saved me. And then
Mhm.
there were other times where I didn't listen to it and I had that underlying feeling like, damn, I should have listened to that feeling and I didn't. And I ended up in an unfavorable outcome. And I was like, damn it, like, why didn't I
Yeah.
just listen? And really being able to just trust yourself is so important through your own healing process as well. Yeah.
Oh my god. Yes.
It's so important. We think that everybody else knows the best decision for us, like, we have to confide in everybody else and, like, get their second opinion, but honestly, we deep down at the core, we know what is best for us, and we just
Mhm.
have to listen a bit harder to get there.
Oh my god. I mean, I feel like we're so used to just from like, I don't know, Hollywood or watching all the shows that we watch. I think about this in terms of dating, right? Like you go on a date, what's the first thing that people do? It's like, let me get together with my girlfriends and like talk about this person and like what how do we feel about this? But I mean, we've all been in situations where we have started dating someone and very early on we had this feeling of like, no, like this isn't the right person or this isn't going to work out. But then we
Mhm.
continue to hang out because, we're not trusting that and then you look back like 5, 6 months later and you're like, "Oh yeah, I kind of knew that all along."
Yep.
Um so yeah, it's so important to trust yourself, and I think, we've both clearly had experiences where we've trusted and we haven't trusted, but I actually think not trusting yourself is a great way to learn. Like, "Oh, wow, okay, that was intuition and that
Right.
was correct." So it really helps us for the future.
That's a very good point. You definitely learn from it. It's just you look back and you're like, "Damn, I should have just listened because then I wouldn't have ended up in that situation." But like you said,
Yeah.
going forward, you learn from that and then you're able to distinguish what that feeling is because for the longest time I just thought it was me second guessing myself and just being in my head. But it actually is, like you need to listen to this, you need to do
Mhm.
this, or you need to not do this right now. What are some ways, if you don't mind recommending, what are some ways that people can better understand their intuition if they've never done it or if they're still starting out with it?
Right. So, I mean, the first thing I would say is learn to be a little bit more still, like really slow down. Because intuition is sort of like a quieter voice, whereas the voice of panic, I'm sure if, someone were to create 2 characters, you could see what they would sound like. Panic is loud, right? Anxiety is sort of like, "Ah," but intuition is very quiet. And so in order to hear it, we have to get quiet. And so I love the idea of just, like, connecting with nature, going for really deliberate walks. Sometimes we go for walks, but we're, like, on our phone, like, what are we doing?
Mhm.
Or we're, like, heartedly doing things, but, like, really just, like, slowing down. Even I would say meditation as well, but for some people, if that feels like, "Man, I don't wanna meditate," like, sit down on your couch, like, sit your butt on your couch and just sit with yourself.
Mm.
It doesn't have to be, like, a very specific process, but yeah, so I guess the main thing would be that intuition is a quieter voice and it's very repetitive. So, this is where I think people get mixed up. Intuition is quiet and repetitive. Our emotions are very reactive and impulsive. And so sometimes when we say, "Oh, just follow your gut, follow your intuition," people are like, "Oh, well, I don't I don't feel great about that job because, like, last week I had an outburst, but so far, like, everything's fine and I haven't actually had any deep down feelings of leaving the job. I just need to work on my emotions. Like, that's an
Mhm.
emotional reaction. Intuition, you will know it's intuition because it will keep coming back to you. Like, the
Yep.
same message is gonna keep knocking at you. So, for me, when I was in the dental field, that's what I did before I got into coaching. I so before I even finished school, I knew that I didn't wanna do the job, which really
Mhm.
sucked because 'cause I'm like, "Damn it, like, we just spent all this money on school and now I don't wanna do this thing." But I was like, "You know what? I'm just gonna do the job because that's what you're supposed to do."
Mhm.
And also, like, let me make the money back so I don't, whatever. So I first started getting I got into it by getting a temp job and, I kept on working and then eventually ended up in full time. But the whole time before I started, during, just the whole time, I always had that nagging feeling. It's like a quiet voice deep within.
Mhm.
It'll keep knocking. So that's the difference between intuition and impulsive, emotional, I'm freaking out feelings.
Right. Well, that's honestly a great example. Great example. It is a very quiet voice. It sneaks up on you. You just
And
gotta
if you
listen
don't
to it.
listen, it may not sneak up on you anymore. It may start, like, literally giving you panic attacks. So,
Yes.
it can get
Yes.
louder and louder, but typically it starts really quietly.
Yes. And a big sign is also if everything around you seems like it's not going the way it should be, if doors keep closing, that is deliberate. You have to listen to that.
I like
Mhm.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm,
Like, if you keep trying to fix a situation and it's not being fixed,
mm.
that's a sign.
Yeah. I mean,
Mhm.
intuition doesn't it's not like a forceful thing.
Yeah.
Um Yeah, I feel like so many times we try to force things. We try to force ourselves into relationships or, "Oh, that person, they don't really text me back much, but, like, okay, I'll, like, try anyway." Like, we were constantly forcing,
Mhm.
and that is not intuition. Absolutely
No.
not. Yeah.
Nope.
I like that. That's a
Don't
good
force it.
I love any visual, so, like, doors closing, that's a good visual. Yeah.
Well, that's what I noticed for myself. I was the type of person I always tried to fix things and tried to make it better and get around it. And if it just, I wasn't able to get anywhere, I had to walk away. And
Mhm.
I look back and I'm like, God, why did I try so hard to try to fix that thing? I should have just walked away immediately because I was able to recognize, after the fact that it wasn't for me. It wasn't for me at all. And so for me, that's been a really helpful thing too, is just
Mhm.
allow it to go as it's supposed to. It's already determined
Mm.
for you, just go with it.
Oh my god, yes, and that's you're really talking about surrender.
Mhm.
There's definitely a surrender in that, just being like, "Crap, it's not
Yep.
all up to me. It's not all up to me." So, I love that.
Well, thank you so much. Well, I know we're getting close to time here, but I always ask people who are on the podcast, how can you choose to be bold going forward?
I like that. Ooh, I have 2 things coming to mind. So, just because of our conversation, I think being bold is trusting your intuition.
Mhm.
Trusting your intuition. And so continuing to trust that. And for me, the second thing that's coming up is, for me specifically right now, I need to slow the heck down. Like, I need to slow down. And I'm such a inspired action, like, ooh, yeah, kind of person. And I actually do trust my ideas and I move forward. I take action. But lately I've been getting the nudge to, like, slow the heck down or we will slow you down. And by we, I
Mhm.
mean the universe, my guides, whatever, right? It's like slow the heck down. So weirdly enough, being bold for me right now is more of a you need to slow down thing. Yeah.
I'm 100% with you on that one right now too. I mean,
Yeah.
life gets so quick, so fast, even when you try to be slow, so you have to forcefully hit the pause button.
Absolutely. And so much
Yeah.
of, life out there, society, everything, it's like it is so fast. And even if you go on your phone, you're bombarded with like a million things to know. And it's just fast, 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 more, more, more. But it's funny because it normally if someone asked me, "Oh, like what would you do this week to be more bold?" I'd say like, "Oh, like I'd go out there and I do that thing and like, all that." But yeah, right now just really feeling called to really slow it down, man.
I
Yeah.
love that. Well, slow it down, okay?
Okay.
No rush to get things done. Go at your own pace. It'll all work out
Yes.
no matter what.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. And also before we end, is there anything that you would like to promote on your end?
Yeah, I mean, right now, one of my main programs is called Beyond Anxiety, and it's the one that was inspired from that client who was having a panic attack every day. And this program is a 3-month program that specifically helps people to replace that like overwhelming anxiety feeling in their life with profound peace, inner power, and that often naturally leads them into their purpose. And so this is my 3-month program that I am taking people through. It really helps them get clear on like what is the message that the anxiety is sending and then working to like really incorporate what the message is trying to tell you into their lives, if that makes sense. And yeah, that can be found on my website at ramanhari.com.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'll make sure I have all your social info in the description so if people want to go follow you, they can. But other than that, thank you so much for being a guest today. I had so much fun talking with you.
Yeah, thanks for having it. It was so fun talking to you as well. Soul
Oh,
fam.
thank you. Yes, got to stick together. Got to stick
Yes,
together.
I love it.
Well, thank you to everybody that was listening today. Feel free to stay tuned for our next episode. It's going to be a good one. So we'll see you on the next run. And that's a wrap on another episode of Boldly You. I hope you're feeling inspired, motivated, and ready to make some bold moves in your own life. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Connect with us on social media. Share your own bold moments, your challenges, and your victories. We want to hear from you. Until next time, this is Destiny Mackey, urging you to be you and be bold.